The archaeological record is defined by a fundamental tension: the immense labor invested in ancient artifacts versus their often ambiguous, or entirely absent, utility. This is not a collection of isolated curiosities, but a persistent behavioral signature found across deep time. The pattern repeats across continents, cultures, and even different hominin species, manifesting in objects that are monumental in scale, baffling in their redundancy, or intricate beyond any practical need. Each discovery represents a significant expenditure of time, resources, and skill for a purpose we cannot easily explain through the lens of pure survival. These anomalies are critical data points. They challenge the default assumption that ancient behavior was driven solely by function. When a creation's effort-to-utility ratio is radically unbalanced, it demands a different kind of analysis. It forces a re-evaluation of what constituted purpose for our ancestors and suggests that the drive to create for non-functional reasons is a deeply rooted, defining trait of hominin cognition. These enigmatic labors compel us to build a more complex model of ancient intelligence, one that accommodates symbolism, aesthetics, and perhaps even boredom, far earlier than we once thought possible. In the 1930s, workers for the United Fruit Company clearing jungle in Costa Rica's Diquís Delta stumbled upon hundreds of nearly perfect stone spheres. Initially mistaking them for natural formations or believing they held gold, they used bulldozers and dynamite, damaging or destroying many before authorities could intervene. This destructive discovery brought a profound archaeological mystery to light. Archaeologists have since catalogued approximately 300 spheres, known locally as Las Bolas. Their physical attributes are staggering. Ranging from a few centimeters to over 2 meters in diameter and weighing up to 15 tons, most were carved from gabbro, a hard volcanic rock, with a few made from limestone or sandstone. Their creation represents an immense labor investment. The pre-Columbian Diquís people, who inhabited the region from around 300 BC to the 16th century, shaped these objects through meticulous hammering and polishing, likely requiring thousands of man-hours per sphere. Moving the heaviest examples from distant quarries to their final placements was an extraordinary logistical feat for a culture without wheeled vehicles or draft animals. While other Diquís artifacts like mounds, plazas, and animal motif statues exist, our knowledge of the culture is sparse, derived largely from the spheres themselves. Production appears to have accelerated after 1000 AD before abruptly ceasing around the time of the Spanish arrival. However, no Spanish accounts mention the spheres, suggesting the Diquís culture may have vanished just before European contact, leaving their fate as unknown as the objects they created. The purpose of this massive undertaking remains entirely unresolved. Hypotheses range from astronomical markers and status symbols to purely religious objects. Without any written records, each theory is speculative. The diquisspheres stand as a primary example of a monumental investment of labor for a function that is completely lost, a testament to a complex cultural logic that defies simple explanation. In India's northeastern state of Assam, another monumental mystery parallels the pattern of immense, unexplained labor. While formally documented by archaeologists in the 2020s, local awareness of giant sandstone jars scattered through the forests dates back to at least the 1930s. This long-standing enigma is now under intense scrutiny, revealing a puzzle even more confounding than its regional counterparts. The scale of the undertaking is staggering. Carved from sandstone, some jars stand up to 3 meters tall and weigh over 10 tons. The logistics of carving and moving these vessels through difficult terrain would have been a significant challenge for any ancient society. Dating suggests the jars are over 400 years old, placed before 400 BC, but the identity of the culture that created them remains completely unknown. This leaves their function as the central question. The default hypothesis for large, ancient vessels is often related to burial practices, a theory supported by a similar phenomenon in neighboring Laos. There, thousands of large stone jars at the Plain of Jars sites have been found containing human remains, confirming their use in mortuary rituals. This parallel makes the findings in Assam a critical anomaly. Archaeologists have now identified over 700 jars across 4 distinct, localized sites, but unlike in Laos, they are almost entirely empty. Systematic excavation has revealed no significant contents, no bones, no grave goods, and no artifacts that would confirm a burial purpose. An unconfirmed report from the 1930s mentioned finding bones in one jar, but this has never been substantiated, leaving the observation as an ambiguous footnote rather than conclusive evidence. The Great Jars of Assam thus represent a stark deviation. We are left with hundreds of massive, laboriously crafted containers distributed across a specific landscape with no discernible contents or purpose. They stand as silent, unfilled vessels, another powerful data point demonstrating a culture investing enormous energy into an activity whose logic is now completely lost. The impulse to make marks without clear function, what we now call doodling, is not a modern distraction but a fundamental hominin behavior. The evidence for this extends deep into the Stone Age, challenging our assumptions about the minds of our ancestors. At South Africa's Blombos Cave, a site rich with artifacts from the Middle Stone Age, archaeologists found a small, 73,000-year-old rockflake marked with 9 red ochre lines. After 7 years of rigorous analysis, researchers confirmed the lines were not accidental, they were deliberately drawn with a crayon-like tool. This artifact represents the oldest known drawing by a Homo sapiens, a simple crosshatch pattern that pushes back the timeline for modern human symbolic thought. Even more disruptive is an engraving from the Trinil site in Indonesia, the same location where Java man was discovered. Here, a 485,000-year-old freshwater mollusk shell bears a distinct zigzag pattern. Analysis confirmed it was deliberately engraved in a single session, likely with a sharp tool such as a shark tooth. The creator was not a Homo sapiens, but a Homo erectus, a species long recognized for its sophisticated toolmaking but not for abstract expression. This single artifact ignited a fierce debate, forcing a radical re-evaluation of Homo erectus's cognitive abilities. The capacity for non-representational design was not exclusive to our own lineage. The purpose of these ancient marks remains unknown, with hypotheses ranging from territorial claims and courtship displays to some form of symbolic communication. However, for many researchers, the most plausible explanation is also the simplest. The markings are the product of an idle moment, an ancient expression of boredom. This conclusion is not trivial. It suggests that the drive to create for non-utilitarian reasons, to simply occupy the hands and mind, is a deeply ingrained trait, one that predates our own species and reveals a cognitive complexity far earlier than previously imagined. This impulse to create for reasons beyond function scales up from personal marks to near-industrial production. For an immense span of time, from 1.95 million to 130,000 years ago, hominin species like Homo erectus and early Neanderthals participated in the Acheulean tool industry. Its signature artifact, the handaxe, was a pear-shaped stone tool so versatile it has been called the Swiss Army knife of the Stone Age, used for everything from butchering game to digging for roots. Its utility is clear. The paradox emerges at sites where these tools appear in vast, unused quantities. The most perplexing case is the Laura Sale Basin in Kenya, which holds the highest concentration of Acheulean hand axes on the planet. Here, archaeologists unearth thousands of these tools alongside the butchered remains of ancient elephants and hippos. The initial interpretation was a massive tool factory or processing site. However, the evidence directly contradicts this utilitarian model. First, the vast majority of the axes show little to no wear, they were meticulously crafted but never put to use. Second, the ratio of tools to toolmakers is inexplicable. While thousands of axes litter the site, the only hominin evidence recovered is a single, fragmented 950,000-year-old skull. Third, the craftsmanship is often far too refined for simple function, with many axes exhibiting a careful symmetry that represents a significant, unnecessary aesthetic investment. Finally, the site lacks the expected signatures of a factory, no distinct production zones, no large piles of manufacturing debris, and no evidence the tools were being exported. These contradictions effectively dismantle the factory hypothesis. The data forces a rejection of a purely functional explanation for these accumulations. Instead of a workshop, Laura Sale Basin and other similar sites may represent something else entirely, a ritual cache, a display of social currency, or a form of prehistoric collection. The alternative hypotheses suggest these objects held value far beyond their practical use, operating as status symbols or items with deep symbolic meaning. The Acheulean paradox demonstrates that the investment of enormous labor into non-utilitarian pursuits was not just an individual quirk, but a behavior that could operate at a massive scale, revealing complex social and aesthetic motivations deep in our ancestral past. From monumental stone spheres and unused jars to ancient doodles and vast stockpiles of pristine hand axes, the archaeological record reveals a persistent pattern. This was not an isolated quirk but a recurring behavior across species and millennia, demonstrating that motivations far beyond simple utility or survival have always been present. The immense labor invested in these objects forces a critical verdict: the drive to create, express, or simply occupy the mind is a fundamental, ancient part of our lineage. These echoes challenge us to look past function and recognize the deep, complex roots of human culture and cognition.